There are multiple reasons why Australia has a housing shortage and why the numbers of new dwellings needed are simply not being built. This is something I've spoken about regularly in the past and will continue to do so, as it's the core issue creating problems for real estate consumers of all kinds: home buyers, investor buyers and tenants. Here are the latest events and announcements which help to explain why we have a housing shortage with rising prices and rising rents, problems which are not going to be fixed in the foreseeable future. Now, item number one, bureaucratic delays. Now, Sydney councils, as one example, are sitting on a backlog of almost 8,500 unresolved development applications, as well as requests for development certificates. Now, that's according to the New South Wales government and their most recent data. There are over 5,000 unresolved development applications across the Greater Sydney area, plus 3,300 active complying development certificates. Now, 5 councils each have more than 300 local development applications that are waiting to be finalised. Data from the Department of Planning, Housing and Infrastructure lists the Inner West Council as the worst offender, with 456 active development applications waiting for a determination. The Northern Beaches, Hillshire and Cumberland councils also have major backlogs. Thousands more complying development certificates are also adding to the backlog, despite the fact that they were designed to give faster approvals to developments that meet certain requirements. Some councils are taking more than a year to approve homes, and some developers are waiting for up to a decade for projects to be approved. Now, in my view, one of the core issues is that many councils have a NIMBY attitude to development, especially high density residential. They simply don't want developments to be built, and they do everything they can to frustrate builders. Item number two, projects not financially viable. In Perth, as an example, the rate of apartment completions has dropped to its lowest levels since records began in the 1980s. A new Property Council report says that to meet the housing target set by the National Housing Accord, Western Australia would need to be delivering 5 times the number of apartments per year that it currently is. The Sky High report says there are more than 10,000 apartments approved for Western Australia, but effectively they're all on hold and unable to be constructed. The main issue is that projects are just not financially viable because the cost of delivering an apartment is generally higher than the market is willing to pay, so projects simply don't stack up. And only luxury apartments are economically viable projects at the moment. The report blames climbing construction costs driven by labour shortages and competition for labour from government and mining sectors. The report says developers are reporting that construction cost estimates are now almost double the cost of similar developments 5 years ago. The Property Council expects that costs will climb even higher as the new National Construction Code and bargaining agreements are imposed by government and take effect. This is a problem not only in Perth, but right across Australia. Developers are scrapping unit projects because costs are so high it makes them financially unviable. The Australian Construction Industry Forum says it's a worrying trend for a country that needs more denser homes, not only apartment towers, but medium-rise and townhouse developments in existing suburbs to tackle the chronic undersupply of housing and to ensure longer-term affordability. The Forum's Construction Forecasting Council Chair and Chief Economist, Nerida Knisby, says it's very, very expensive to build apartments and many projects are just not going ahead. Item number 3, worker shortages. A recent report reveals that Australia needs 130,000 additional workers to combat labour shortages in the construction sector. This has prompted calls for rapid reforms from both federal and state governments to attract and retain skilled labour. The report says the nation is on track in 2024 for the worst year in new home builds in over a decade, with a 9% decline in new building starts totaling just 158,000 for the year, when it needs to be 240,000 per year to meet the federal government's fanciful target of 1.2 million new homes in 5 years. Construction starts for detached houses have dropped 10%, while high density projects have declined by 6%. And if this pace continues, Australia could see fewer than 800,000 new home starts over 5 years, leading to a shortfall of over 400,000 homes compared to that National Housing Accord target. The decline in apprenticeship numbers further compounds the crisis, with completions down 8% and commencements down 12% in the past year. Now, item number 4, political policies. The Housing Industry Association says a home building recovery is possible because buyer demand is rising, but state government housing policies risk stalling the revival. HIA senior economist Matt King says demand for new homes nationally is accelerating, largely due to high population growth, low unemployment, stable incomes, and the absence of interest rate rises for the past year. King says activity generally is picking up, but there are big differences across capital city and regional markets. Sydney remains an outlier, and there's no indication still of a near-term rebound in residential building in that big city. King says new home building in the Sydney basin remains exceptionally low, primarily due to high land prices and excessive housing taxes and infrastructure charges. Australia-wide, the HIA says the detached home building sector looks promising, but the unit sector remains constrained and is unlikely to experience recovery before the middle of 2025. And King says the sector continues to be dampened by skilled labour shortages, building credit constraints, and the aftermath of significant building material cost escalations. The extent of the recovery in new home building will be determined by the ability of governments to ease the barriers to home building, he says. Recent state government plans to increase surcharges on foreign investors and to introduce taxes on short-term rental accommodation are unhelpful, he says, at a time when stability is needed to achieve the target of 1.2 million homes. King says the rate of home building has been slowed down by government failure to implement policies such as expedited land releases, concessions on property taxation, and accelerated development approval timeframes. Item number 5, very high land costs. The rapidly rising cost of new home sites is one of the biggest barriers to easing the housing shortage. New figures for southeast Queensland indicate that the cost of residential home sites has jumped by as much as $120,000 in a year. It's up 21% in one local government area of southeast Queensland, where it now costs as much for a block of land as the typical home did, that's a house and land, just 2 years ago. Now this is the city of Brisbane local government area, where land prices rose 8.7% in the September quarter alone, pushing the median price for a block of land to $685,000. Now that's $3,000 more than an established home cost in this area just a couple of years ago. The second biggest annual surge in land prices occurred in the city of Ipswich, where the median block rose 15%, or by $48,000 to hit $360,000 for the typical block, with the third fastest pace of growth in the Moreton Bay local government area, where prices rose by 10% to reach a median land price of $415,000. The cheapest blocks of land in southeast Queensland are in Logan City in Brisbane South, where a third of all land sales for southeast Queensland are now occurring, with the median price for a block of residential land now sitting at $350,000 after a rise of almost 10% across the year. The Gold Coast has got the second highest land price in southeast Queensland. Typical blocks now cost around $620,000 after an 8% rise in the past year. So you can imagine what a new house on a block of land costs when the land alone costs well over $600,000, as it does in the city of Brisbane and on the Gold Coast. Why does it cost so much? Primarily because of bureaucratic delays, government taxes, fees and charges, and high interest rates, all problems created by our elected representatives.